from Representative Lamar, but I don't want to waste anybody's time, so let's jump in. Happy St. Patty's Day to all of you. My friend of mine sent me a joke about an hour ago. It says, "What do you call a fake Irish diamond?" A shamrock.
Very cute, and it's clean,
Yeah,
so that's good.
Okay. The first order of business is for those of you who are on the call who were not here last time. We did do 1-minute introductions, and Don, that Poland, that you may be the only one, but you want to just take a minute to say hello to everybody?
Yeah, hello. Thank you for having me as part of this committee. I am a urban geographer and urban planner. I've been working in the profession for about 27 years. Much of my career is focused on housing, neighborhood reinvestment, and ultimately zoning. Work on both sides of the table for municipalities and also for private developers. So I feel I have a good grasp on housing and affordable housing issues from kind of multiple perspectives. So thank you, Tim.
Great. All right. So I don't see anyone else who was not on the call last time. Hello, Emily. Hello, Michelle. Hello, Lamond and Betsy. And okay, so I think we'll go past that one. So just to give a brief summary of our March 3rd call, though most of you were there, we did our introductions. We mapped out what our task is as assigned by the legislature and the state statute that formed this committee and this working group. And we discussed an in-person meeting, which I'll come back to later in the agenda. And we identified a couple of available online resources that people might take the time to look at, such as the compilations of affordable housing working plans that the Southeast Connecticut Council of Governments has been putting together. And then also, I believe, OPM is now assembling its own list, which is also part of the required statute. So with that, what we're going to do today for maybe 20-25 minutes or so is, as we discussed last time, our charge is to prepare a guidance document for municipal officials that will explain to them what the expectations and standards and suggestions are for an affordable housing plan, and with particular attention to 4 sources of law. Obviously, if municipalities or as I will call them, towns, when towns are preparing their plans, they have to be consistent with the legal requirements. And I now see Representative Lamar joining. Hello, Representative Lamar. We're just getting underway.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I'm sorry, everyone, for being a little late. I'm competing for bandwidth with my children who just got home. I apologize for that.
All right. Well, that doesn't sound like a fair fight. So good luck with that. So we were just about to launch into the primer part of 3, 4, 5, and 6 of our agenda. Unless you have any remarks you want to make before we do that.
I do not, other than to say thank you for providing this primer for everyone. I really do appreciate you spending your time and expertise on this group as we try to evaluate the state statutes, our requirements thereof, and what we can do to build better affordable housing plans across the state. I really do appreciate you guys spending your time with us.
Very good. Well, thank you for your leadership. So, four sources of law that we all have to keep in mind as we draft our guidance document. One is what's called the Zoning Enabling Act, Section 8-2 of the General Statutes. Second is the Affordable Housing Statute, Section 8-30G. The third, and as I'll explain, probably the most important, is Public Act 21-29, which was also known as the Desegregate Connecticut bill that was adopted last year, and which made several important changes to the Zoning Enabling Act. And then we have what's called the Consolidated Plan, or the CON Plan, for Housing and Community Development, which our guest speaker, Dara Covell, will touch on. And then finally, the State Plan of Conservation and Development, which Bruce Witchen from OPM, who I misidentified as a commission member, he is a working group member, but he will comment on that. So we're just going to go through those four because it's, and understanding that many of you are not lawyers, but we're going to just try to give you a sort of a layperson's understanding of the legal direction that we have here. So let me start with the structure of land use law in Connecticut, because that's an important thing for everybody to understand. One of the sort of interesting oddities of, and this is not unique to Connecticut, but we have, you think about it, we have several state agencies that have professional staff, experts on staff. They administer the entire state with one set of rules. That would be energy, environmental protection, public utilities, transportation, and public safety, just to name a few. And all of those deal in many ways with land use, and maybe not with housing directly, but they deal with land use. But our structure in Connecticut is, when it comes to planning and zoning, that authority is delegated by the legislature right to the municipal level, to the town level. And it's not hard to make the argument that that is a very illogical structure to make land use decisions. I don't know if you know the legend, maybe it's more than a legend, but we have 169 towns of relatively equal size, and the size was basically created in the 17 and 1800s to make sure that nobody in any given town had more than a half day's ride on horseback to the church at the center of the town. That's how we ended up with our town sizes. So that, of course, has nothing to do with land use, but we have 169 relatively small geographic areas, and everyone is different, and each town has its own independent authority over planning and zoning, and that's how we structure our land use. In addition, the Zoning Enabling Act was drafted about 100 years ago, and as documented in very well in the recent book, The Color of Law, a lot of the reason for the original National Zoning Enabling Act was to create and enforce racial, economic, and even religious segregation. And we deal very much today with the remnants and even some parts of that original statute that are still in place. Also, as I'm sure you know, local land use is mostly administered by volunteers. Interesting part of last year's legislation was required training for zoning and planning commissioners for the first time. So they're volunteers, but until this year, they were not required to have any training. And then the last piece of sort of the structure is judges are generally directed by law to not interfere with the policy and regulation choice and permitting choices that are made by the local land use commission. So they defer to local choice. So in my view, but I think pretty much any land use lawyer in Connecticut would agree, the consequence of this structure is that most of our land use decision being made at the local level is what I will call parochial. It's looks at the boundaries of the town and not regional and not statewide considerations, which could be better or for worse, but that's just the structure that we have in place. And sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes that promotes a sort of a resistance to change or protection to the status quo. So against that background, we have the Section 8-2, the Zoning Enabling Act, which is the legislature's delegation of a broad range of authority over land use and specifically housing. The towns can control the size of buildings, minimum lot size and parcel. They can allow or not allow what's known as cluster development, smaller lot sizes in exchange for more open space. They have to review their zoning regulations for consistency with the municipal plan of conservation and development, but it's not required to be consistent with it. And oh, by the way, I assume you all got the outline that I sent earlier today, which I'm looking at right now. So if you're looking at the outline, on the top of page 2, I have quoted from the key section of 8-2 that deals with housing. And very important to note, what I've given you is the pre-2021 version of the statute, because then at the end, I'm going to explain to you what the changes were that were made last year. So there's this reference to regulations shall encourage development of housing opportunities, including opportunities for multifamily dwellings consistent with soil type, terrain, and infrastructure for all residents of the municipality and the planning region. Then you have shall also promote housing choice and economic diversity. And then finally, encourage development of housing which meets the state's consolidated plan, which Dara will talk about momentarily, and the state plan of conservation and development. So that is the statewide direction from the legislature as to what towns are supposed to do with their zoning powers in terms of housing. Now, of course, you've heard a lot about 830G, which is called the Affordable Housing Land Use Appeals Act. For our context, I would make the following points. 830G does not mandate the construction of housing. It does not fund the construction of housing. The background of 830G is that in the 1980s, which I coincided with the start of my time in Connecticut, housing prices were escalating very rapidly. I mean, double-digit increases year after year. But local commissions were, for whatever reason, not approving zoning proposals that involved multifamily. I would say generally not approving zoning proposals that involved multifamily and affordable developments. And sometimes they would base it on the character of the town or other reasons that were sort of, inchoate or hard to understand. And the courts were deferring to that local discretion, as I told you before. So the result was that housing prices are escalating, but zoning commissions at the local level were not approving more affordable and multifamily housing as a counterbalance to the rapid escalation of single-family home prices. And the result, as determined by the first Blue Ribbon Commission in 1988 and 1989, was that affordable housing was not getting built, and indeed there was greater and greater segregation, economic segregation. The 830G was then adopted in 1990 as a so-called builder's remedy, intended to help an applicant, property owner, builder, developer to be able to overcome zoning or planning commission resistance to such a proposal. So the current standard is 30% of the proposed units proposed as affordable or some form of governmental assistance in the application process, such as a low-income housing tax credit and infusion of equity at the start of the process. So if someone makes that kind of an application and it's denied at the local level and they appeal to court, the burden of proof shifts in court to the commission to prove that the denial was based on public health or safety. And remember I said that in the normal zoning system, the judges would defer to the local choice. On the 830G, the burden shifts and the judges are not supposed to defer, but the zoning commission is supposed to come out with the proof that shows the basis for the denial. So that overcoming or changing the deference is a key aspect of 830G. And then the last point about 830G, there are two exemptions. There's a permanent exemption for all the towns that have more than 10% of their total housing units that are either formally deed restricted for the long term or mortgages issued by the state or some other form of governmental assistance. So if you're above 10%, no one can file an 830G application in your municipality. At present, there are 31 of our 169 towns that are exempt. And then the second is the exemption is a 4-year exemption known as the moratorium process, which is based on a town-by-town point system based on actual units built and certificates of occupancy issued and occupied. Okay, then just to finish up, and this is really, really important. And again, we have a long process ahead of this and we will go over these in more detail, but I'm just going to introduce them. So Public Act 2129, which created this commission and this working group, took away created some new requirements and some new prohibitions on how towns use their zoning enabling act authority. For example, I mentioned before in the main housing section of 8-2, there's that word encourage, which, obviously implies, well, we'd like you to do this, but we're not going to require it. 2129 took out the word encourage and you, in one case said, substituted the word provide for, and in another case expressly allow. So that's an intentional change. No more encouragement. It's now a direction from the legislature to promote housing choice, housing opportunities for multifamily dwellings and so forth. So it's really important in our guidance document when we get there to make sure towns and their officials understand that there's a higher level, a greater specificity of direction from the legislature that should be reflected in their affordable housing plans. Two other changes that were made, which may sound trivial, but in my view, in the aggregate, they're very important. There's now a limitation on the number of parking spaces that can be required of multifamily units. There's a limit on what's called minimum floor area. If you're going to build a unit, it has to be at least X hundred square feet. It's now has to be based on the building code or the public health code, which is about 300 square feet. So if there's a 1,200 square foot minimum size for a residential unit, that's way off the charts, and that's not allowed. And you put these together, and property owners and developers and applicants can actually increase the density. That if you less parking and smaller units, that translates into greater density. There's a ban on caps, limits on numerical limits on multifamily housing over 4 units and what's called middle housing, which is duplexes and triplexes. There's very specific rules intended to encourage or promote alternative dwelling units, a small ancillary residential unit on an existing property. And then finally, and this is, I've been saying for a year, this is kind of the sleeper provision from last year, is a requirement that zoning regulations affirmatively further the purposes of the Federal Fair Housing Act, which means now that zoning regulations are supposed to include proactive steps to overcome discrimination, segregation, and exclusion. So an affordable housing plan going forward should go through the list of all the regulations and say, are there any things here that we can change to lessen or eliminate exclusion or something that directly or inadvertently promotes segregation or exclusion. So it's important to recognize that last year's legislation, the same act that set up this commission, also really added levels of specificity that towns should, going forward with their affordable housing plans, pay attention to. And really a big part of our job is to point that out to them in our eventual guidance document and explain it to them. So thank you for listening to that summary, and and why don't we just hold questions, and let me ask Dara Covell to now talk about the con plan, and then I'll have Bruce Winchell talk about the state POCD, and then we'll come back and have questions. Okay, thank you, Dara, and thank you for being here.
Yeah, you bet, Tim. Great to be here. Great to see you all. I was confessing to Tim when he asked me to talk about the con plan that it had been a little while since I spent time with it. The consolidated plan is one of those documents, if you're in affordable housing, that it sort of becomes part of the background of what you think of in terms of some of the framing documents that define how affordable housing resources get spent. It's a requirement by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development that all states and cities that are what we call entitlement communities, which is to say cities that are larger than 50,000 people, have a con plan, because at that threshold of 50,000 or more, those towns and cities receive resources, primarily the programs that we think of. By way of background, because I don't know most of you, I'm an affordable housing developer. I've been in affordable housing development all my life. I started my work in California, and then now run a company that's based in Boston, but does work in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic. And I also ran the multifamily and single family division at CHFA, the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, which obviously uses the con plan, among other things, to reference how it thinks about resource allocation. So that's all to say, these plans, the consolidated plan for the state of Connecticut, and then individually, I think there are somewhere between 19 and 20 cities in Connecticut that also do con plans because they get these resources, which are the Home Investment Fund Program and the Community Development Block Grant Program. Those are the biggest two programs that come from the federal government to states and cities to fund all sorts of activities, but focused around affordable housing and community development. How they are deployed varies widely in terms of the actual resources from state to state and city to city. CDBG, Community Development Block Grant, can be used for everything from facade improvements for retail to single family home mortgage assistance, and everything in between. These programs are available to these different cities and towns, and are 22. I looked that up, and then I found somewhere else where it said 19. So that's that's right. So the good thing about the con plan is that as a 5-year plan, the state of Connecticut and those 22 cities write a plan, and then they do annual action plans, which both sort of define the action that they will take to meet the housing needs in their community. And then they do assessment plans, so you can also see what has been done with those resources, where it's been spent. From a development perspective for affordable housing purposes, it shows up also. The Department of Housing uses it to allocate its resources, as well as the Affordable Housing Trust Program. And I think it's an annual allocation that Department of Housing receives about $28 million, which is not inconsequential resources, but sort of a component of the affordable housing resources that can produce housing in Connecticut. And those, then they pair those resources with other resources like the low-income housing tax credit program for sort of larger developments or smaller developments, and various other programs that they're interested in. Interestingly, I think in Connecticut, the Community Development Block Grant Program is primarily focused on sort of the small cities. The state uses those resources to focus on small city programs, and that can do, actually we have a project that Tim and I worked on in Branford, where some of those resources have been used to help improve a sidewalk for a state-sponsored housing property. And the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority references the con plan as one of its governing documents when it thinks about allocating low-income housing tax credits, which again is the only large-scale production affordable housing program there is right now in the country. So that's important, and these resources can be paired again with the tax credit program to build affordable housing. Usually at scale, somewhere between 30 and 60 units is the sort of traditional tax credit development. So anyway, I'll stop there. It's obviously it's the con plan is an important document, and it does have a lot of information about where the city and the cities that use it and the state has put its resources. And it is one small piece of the puzzle as it relates to how the state of Connecticut and the towns and cities can try and encourage housing. Just my own personal sense right now is the zoning and these plans that will come out of this legislation could be really impactful in terms of bringing some conversation to the whole planning for affordable housing discussion. Having one more anecdote is that having started my career in affordable housing in California, they have done this work through with a statute that's called the Housing Element Program out in California, where every town and city in the state is required to plan for future growth. And it has to show where zoning happens that will address people, the growth of populations in each of the cities and towns. And it has a long studied history that I participated in back in the 90s, and I think is somewhat similar to what's being contemplated here. So I'm available for questions as we go forward, but Tim, thanks for having me.
Thanks. Dara, could you just give a minute on what the low-income housing tax credit program is? That's kind of an important thing we should cover.
Yeah, you bet. So the low-income housing tax credit program was created in 1987 as basically a corporate tax break for any corporation that has a tax liability to incentivize corporations to invest in affordable housing. As I mentioned, over the last 3.5 decades, it has become really the only the only type of resource that's substantial enough to create affordable housing. It is a program governed by the Internal Revenue Service at the federal level, and is allocated to each state's, usually the State Housing Finance Authority. So in the case of Connecticut, CHFA makes decisions about how to allocate this resource. The way it basically works is that CHFA, through a competitive process, and that's true in every state, some states are more competitive than others, puts together a set of points that you have to apply and show how your project stacks up against those points. And then based on if you kind of succeed in kind of making some threshold cutoff, Connecticut traditionally awards about 7 projects, between 5 and 7 projects a year through the 9% program. Then the developers who succeed in receiving those resources go out and sell those tax credits. And those tax credits usually translate into about 10 times the amount of what the state has granted. So the cap right now is about $2 million per project. So if you're doing a larger scale project and you get $2 million, you turn around and sell that, and it can translate into about $20 million, which would be one of many sources that you would probably be using to finance an affordable housing development. And we've done that, where Tim and I are about to close on this deal in Brantford, which will be using those resources to build 67 new units of housing. So that's, and the con plan and the plan of C&D are both referenced again as kind of defining how CHFA thinks about allocating the points. So it's all about the points, and developers follow the money. So that is a really critical component of where money gets spent and where resources get allocated. We call it the qualified allocation plan, is what's CHFA's kind of policy document is to allocate credits. So I hope that's helpful, Jim. Happy to answer any other questions.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you, Fionnuala, for putting up in the chat room a couple of links to the CDBG guidance from HUD. Okay, Bruce, I see you there on the upper right of my screen. Could you chime in? Thank you for being here, and talk about the State Plan of Conservation and Development.
Sure. I'll preface this by saying I tried to put a link in chat and was unable to, but if you go to any search engine and type in CT space POCD space OPM or something like that, you should find it pretty quickly. It'll be confusing once you get there because we're in the middle of an update process. We're on currently the 2013 through 2018 plan, and it's been lingering over at the General Assembly a few years, but the House did approve the next version of the plan, I think yesterday, and the Senate will be taking it up. So that, and there's some date changing going on because the one they're looking at was originally submitted as the 2018 to 2023. So there will be some date shifting and whatnot, but let's put that behind us. The format of the state POCD, it focuses on 6 growth management principles. And the one that you need to know about here is growth management principle number 2, which is expand housing opportunities and design choices to accommodate a variety of household types and needs. And it lists a lot of policies which are kind of precisely the policies one might expect. Now, the fact is, a local developer who has a piece of land and wants to do something on it doesn't need to follow the state POCD. It applies when state agencies are spending state money or providing state subsidies. Another factor here is a lot of times when people review the plan, whether they're looking at this housing section or the environmental section or whatever, it's very easy to think, hey, this policy here is precisely what I want to do. My project is exactly in line with state policy, but there are other policies that might contradict. For instance, an affordable housing project, or I shouldn't say affordable housing project, but some kind of development project that fits the POCD. Otherwise, if it's being put in, say, the area of a watershed contributing to a public water supply, you begin to have other issues that need to be weighed. And so the major message about using the POCD is that really the expectation is that you take in the entire thing and consider the balance or the weighing of things against each other. And for instance, a development project on, say, a watershed, public water supply watershed area might be better suited for an area that isn't a public water supply, and so on. The version that is going through right now is almost identical to the version that we're currently working from. A lot of updating is going to be necessary when we take it up again. I was doing some word searches as we've been listening today, and the word equity only appears in here in the context of financial equity. The word racial and race really do not appear here, except I think there's one direct quote. One could argue in some ways, well, some of the concepts are here about providing opportunities and all that, but I think anyone reading it will recognize there's a lot of work that needs to be done in updating this thing again. And things that are going on, such as the CCDF in general and other things that are going on, will hopefully influence the next update quite a bit. But the central point is that one of the 6 growth management principles that guides this thing is all about housing and talks about choices to accommodate a variety of households. It's the kind of thing that this group is interested in. And I assume any questions will come later.
Yeah, thank you, Bruce. I think we'll go to questions for myself or Dara or Bruce right now. And my first question to you, Bruce, is would it make sense to excise the second growth management principle from the plan and circulate it to this group? In other words, can you read just the second principle and make sense of it, or do you need the whole document?
You can certainly make sense of it. And from the perspective of, say, considering things like equity concerns and whatnot, it would absolutely be worthwhile for this group and any other group who has an interest in that to look at it and make sure that or find the things where those concepts could be developed better, because this certainly is where those are key. My one caution, as I mentioned, if you were considering the consistency of a particular project with the overall POCD, you would not want to look at just the housing section.
Right.
You would need to think about the whole thing.
Good point. Okay. I have to say, the OPM has been working so hard on the revision, even though they're several years behind. It's sort of like the definition of economist is somebody who foretells the past with ever greater certainty. It's it's a daunting challenge that you have, and just to show you what a nerd I am, I've read all the drafts, and I take your points about we may in our work be able to make some suggestions on how to improve the POCD's plan, a focus on housing. So good for that. All right, let me stop there. Anyone have any questions for Bruce or Dara or me about what we covered in the last 25 minutes or so. Yeah, Matt?
Yeah, quick question. 830G, it said either 30% set aside for affordability, but it also said government funds and low-income tax credits. Maybe
Right.
you could explain what that is rather than actually giving affordable housing units.
Yeah, well, the 830G has these two categories. One is the what's called set-aside housing, which is the 30% of the total units. The other category is called assisted housing, which is some form, it doesn't really define or list the programs, but some form of, either equity investment in the front end or construction financing anticipated if the development is approved, or it could be, I guess, a Section 8 based project contract. Anything, if there's government money in the process to create affordable housing, and the developer applicant is willing to go abide by the rules of the financing program, which can be a little different than the strict 830G rules, then if you make that application under 830G, you get the burden shifting at the court level if your proposal is denied. So is it, did I answer your question, Matt?
Not quite. I just want to make sure
Okay.
that this secondary process still has affordable housing for the project. So if you build 100
yeah.
units, is there still 30 units, but
yeah,
it's just
yeah.
funded differently?
Yes, and it has to be a funding program that requires affordable housing. In other words, it's not just a write down of the cost. There has to be a long-term rules and compliance program that includes affordable housing. So, example, generally the low-income housing tax credit has deeper income targeting, higher affordability requirements, lower income targets than the traditional or strict 830G set aside. So, and the compliance periods can vary, but it's generally more affordable, more, what am I trying to say? Deeper targeting of incomes under these programs. And probably the two big ones are the low-income housing tax credit, as Dara explained, and then DOH has its own programs, again, intended to sort of write down the cost of the construction or the investment and allow greater affordability just by decreasing costs. So, okay.
That's good. Yep.
Okay. All right. Any other questions for Dara or Bruce or me?
Tim?
Okay. Yes.
Hi,
Kathleen.
it's
Yes. Hi.
Kathy. Yes, you don't mind if I call you by your first name? Is that okay?
Not at all. Please.
Okay, so Tim, again, maybe we'll just take a few minutes again to clarify the committee's objective, because I know in that February memo, you said the deliverable was a guide, I guess, for the officials at the municipalities. So in my reading and my research of these plans, and Googling, I noticed there's already a process guidebook that was put out pretty recently in December of 2020 by the Connecticut Department of Housing.
Right.
And it looks to be very thorough, very comprehensive, and a very helpful guidebook. So I guess I'm wondering how our task, as you call it, our assigned task, how would that differ from what has already been outlined in that guidebook?
Okay, I think that's the one that Melissa Kaplan Macy referred to in our last call. And let me be very clear, I'm not above plagiarism in a situation like this. But I think certainly one thing that's important is that Public Act 21-29, as I tried to convey in my remarks, has added layers of detail and orientation and direction that didn't exist when the 2020 document was created. So that's the first thing, is we now have more explicit statutory direction. Second, and Melissa, correct me if I'm wrong, the 2020 document was for the agency, a guidance for the agencies, like no. Okay. Why don't you, if you want to take Kathleen's question better than I can.
Yeah, I mean, from my view, I think a good jumping off point is for us to look, like you said, Tim, at the legislation and what it says, needs to be included. But I, obviously having worked with a lot of you and a lot of stakeholders in Connecticut and Department of Housing on that guidebook, I don't think we necessarily do need to recreate the wheel. I think it's a great place for us to start. And then, as a group or as a subcommittee of this group, to review it and see if it, is what we would want to recommend, or if there are parts of it that we think, aren't quite, what this group wants to, sort of present as our work product. But a lot, I would say, went into that, and it was a very collaborative effort. It wasn't just RPA and the Department of Housing kind of in a vacuum, putting that together. So I do think, from my perspective, it covers a lot of ground. It may not be everything, but I would encourage us to take it as a jumping off point at least.
Okay.
Okay, very
So-
good. I guess
Well,
the
that-
biggest difference would be that you're incorporating the most recent legislation as well.
Right.
Okay, thanks.
Now, could somebody take the responsibility circulatable to the group?
Sorry, what was that, Tim? I missed. There was a little bit of feedback.
I would just say, could someone circulate the 2020 document to the group?
I can put the link in the chat right now if that's helpful.
Okay, that would be terrific. Okay, excellent.
Prefer if it could
Good.
be emailed, if it could be emailed to the group, that'd be easier than trying to cut. and
Yeah,
paste
yeah,
it.
Matt, I think we'll do it both ways.
Yeah, I think we have, there's someone who's assisting the committee with some of the administrative work. So if I put the link in the chat, maybe the person who sets up the meetings
Right.
could also just forward that back around to everyone's email.
Okay, good. All right, now let me digress for a moment. Anthony Edwards, I see your name on the screen. I don't believe you were with us on March 3rd, so I want to give you the opportunity to say hello to the group and introduce yourself if I'm.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Hello,
go-
how are you? I came on late. I just got off from work and I just wanted to say hi to everybody, and I'm listening intently, so I really appreciate it for the invite.
Great. Can you just tell us a little bit about, I know you're from New
Sure.
Haven. Tell us what your
Yes, I'm
interest
in
is
the New
in our
Haven
work.
area, and so basically I'm interested in a lot of things: affordable housing, low and moderate income housing. Also looking for to find out where people can go in light of all the, the rent moratorium. There's a lot of people that are homeless. There's a lot of stuff going on between the tenants and the landlords, and it's really pitted each other against each other. I work in an environment where I get calls every day for both landlords and tenants seeking assistance. Right now, what's going on is that the UNICT funds have been exhausted and the application process has stopped as of February 15th. I have a lot of landlords that don't want to renew their leases. I have a lot of landlords who are increasing their rents by $200, $300, $400. I have a lot of tenants who can't afford that. I have a lot of tenants that are being constructively evicted. And so this subject is really important to me. I'm from Boston originally. I know what the high rents are. We're like Boston's like New York, but Connecticut has never seen this before. And so it's just really sad that the disparities have already been here, with regards to income versus the cost of living. However, COVID really put everybody on an even playing field, and it's put everybody at a huge disadvantage. So I follow the housing because I think it's really important here in Connecticut, and I think it's really sad what's going on. I do understand the position the landlords are in because it's a business for them. That's they buy the property to do business, but there's a lot of out-of-state landlords that are price gouging and really putting people in the homeless status. I had like 7 calls today where landlords increase the rents just to get rid of the tenants, and have nothing for no reason. I just want you to pay this, and if you don't pay it, I'm going to court. So I just think it also bogs down the court system. Can you imagine having thousands of cases that landlords have raised the rents and the tenants are like, I'm afraid to sign this. I'll be, obligated to this. I can't afford this. I just got back to work. This is my income, and this is what I can afford. So we're going to be faced with a serious homeless situation. Unlike before with the COVID-19, with people losing their jobs. And right now, the problem is going to be with the tenants and landlords being able to get with each other. I also, initially, when I came to Connecticut, looked at the segregation aspect of it. I found that most of the minority community lives in 3 communities, 3 regions or counties. And that's Hartford County, that's New Haven County, and that's also Fairfield County. I do understand the need of expanding for affordable multiple dwelling houses in the suburbs. I have followed it. I have watched it. I have worked with DSEG Connecticut and some aspect of their campaign. And so I just really want to make sure that we look at all the problems that are going on. And I want people to keep an eye open for what's being created on a daily basis. There are people that are sleeping in their cars. I talk to them every day. There are people that are sleeping in the woods. They're not people that are used to this. There are people that have been faced with this because of what's going on as a result of the rent moratorium being lifted, because of COVID, because of no funds from the UNICT. And it's just really sad. And so I always look for the underdog. I always fight for the underdog. And right now, the underdog is the tenant and the landlord. But as a result of these things that are happening, where's the relief? I mean, how do we get this resolved? Because we can build affordable housing in 2 and 4 or 5 years from now. What do we do right now? Because we're in dire straits. And so I really appreciate you guys inviting me. It means a lot to me. Yeah.
Very good. Well, thank you. We're really looking forward to your participation, and
Thank you.
keep that energy level up, and we're going to
I
really
have
value your
it. I really have
Okay.
it.
Okay.
I conk out about 8 o'clock.
All right. Our
thank
time
you.
is running down. I had one other stray note. Claudette Kidd, when last meeting, you mentioned a program or a room for all. What I didn't know from my notes is that a document or is that a program? Or can you share information with the group about that?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Yes, it's a program. It was
Okay.
started by Mothers and Others for Justice. It was a bit dormant for a while. It's just started back up. The person who's leading that group is Meryl Eaton from Christian Community Action in New Haven. And I can send you that details because I had reached out to her and was waiting for her to get back to me. And I can follow up with that with you.
Okay. All right. That would be much appreciated. Okay.
You're welcome.
I'd now like to just finish up our couple of other agenda items. I put in the agenda the idea of an in-person meeting. Remember last time we talked about trying it on a Saturday, and that doesn't work. Frankly, the parameters I'm trying to achieve here are something that's convenient, that most of the members of the working group could make. It seems like Friday afternoon might be the best time to do it. I'm not crazy enough to think that, as we get into the warmer weather, that becomes more problematic. So I don't need an answer. Thank you, Dar. Thanks for your input. I don't need an answer right now, but I would ask you to email me, or I will email the group in the next couple days, just see whether we could have a consensus to have an in-person meeting.
Sure.
On Friday, April 8th. The staff that we work with says that there's a couple of rooms available in the Hartford Legislative Office Building. I mean, we could do New Haven as a central location, but then we have to find a room. At least if we go to Hartford, we have a ready-made place to sit. And let me explain the method behind the madness. This is my third time participating in what I'll call a statewide working group policy. One was the second Blue Ribbon Commission on Housing, and then there was a later one related to safe driving, which is a whole nother story. But what we did in each of those, which I thought was very helpful, was we started with creating an outline of what we wanted our guidance document to look like at the end. And then we started to, flesh out the sections, what detail and who, and then the responsibility for taking the lead in doing whatever research and discussion and then drafting. And that seemed to work well. And I've been talking to some of you, offline, and I'm willing to take the responsibility by our next meeting of circulating just a first draft of here are some topics that might be important to address in our meeting. And then the main purpose of the in-person meeting would be to just have a roundtable discussion to go over that outline and hopefully end up with a consensus document that would be the guide for our work and our drafting for the rest of our process. So let me stop there. Does that, again, you don't have to commit now to April 4th, but any comments, questions, thoughts about that? That is a way to proceed. Okay. All right. From your standing ovation, I'm going to take that as an acknowledgement.
Actually, just a hand. Sorry, Tim.
Yeah, go ahead, Melissa.
I think you said April 4th and then you said April 8th. Which one is it? And would it be morning, afternoon? What's the timing you were thinking about?
On the 4th, it would be 1 to 4 p.m.
The 4th. Okay.
Yeah. So hopefully that, it's an afternoon event for everybody. And again, we'll email you after this and try to get a count. If we can't do it, we'll just, we could do an online event, but as I said last time, I just think that, it'd be, I think our process would be facilitated and helped by just meeting in person at least once at the beginning. Okay.
Tim,
Yes. Yes, Matt?
The agenda says Friday, the 8th. You just mentioned the 4th twice.
I'm sorry, Friday the 8th. I meant 1 to 4 PM. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to speak over that. Yeah, Friday, April 8th, which is not not Easter weekend, it's the weekend before. So Friday, April 8th from 1 to 4, and I'll make that clear when we send out a follow-up email. Okay. All right, then the next item is where I'm looking for volunteers. And again, doesn't have to be right this moment, but it's obvious that one of the key sections of what we're going to have to create is why explaining to municipal officials and volunteers why affordable housing is important and how to engage citizens in the process. And so I'm looking for a couple of volunteers. You can email me and Representative Lamar after the meeting who would be willing to take the lead, form a subgroup, have your own online meetings, which we can facilitate, and, come up with a list of ideas, and then eventually, a draft of what would probably be the, one of the early sections of our guidance document, because I think that's just a really important thing to have us sink our teeth into early in the process. So again, you don't need to jump at it right now unless anybody has a question or comment on that. But I think I would like to, get a subgroup, and then we'll appoint a coordinator and we'll go from there. All right. Everybody good with that? Okay. Okay. Next is Bruce Witchen. The question was, is OPM now collecting affordable housing plans under the old law as they're coming in and posting them on an accessible place on your website?
And the answer is we are collecting the very few that came in. I was just trying to find the number, but didn't want to count down a spreadsheet. We've received relatively few.
Right. Well, they're due in June. They're due in June, and it's only March.
They are due in June. It's actually they or a letter explaining that it won't be ready is due in June. We're beginning to think we might see more of the latter than the former. The other half of the question is, are we posting them? And the answer to that is that we are not posting them. I went on the website after our last meeting and provided a link to a source for municipal websites. I believe OPM actually has requested legislation in this session to take OPM off the hook for having to even post those plans. It's not just to avoid work. Maybe that's a part of it. But the big thing is that when we have for many other things posted various kinds of plans and other local documents, we have no idea when the municipality moves it or updates the plan. I guess the updates are worse because often we're linking to out-of-date plans. So the goal is to have municipalities post them and make it more clear where people can go to find those, or how they can search out their municipal plan or any other municipal plan.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
So I was emailing with Dan from OPM yesterday about the AHP inventory, and he sent me a link to a spreadsheet that OPM is keeping up. There's 26 that have been submitted. And then I started making a Google folder, like a Drive folder of the PDF. Several of the ones that OPM has submitted, when you dig the town website to find them, they're drafts.
Yep.
Like that's what's posted. They're not final documents. And then I spent some time yesterday with Amanda Kennedy, and we actually put everyone we could find on CCAPA. So there's more there today than ever before, but that work was done just yesterday. And Bruce, I think that Amanda and I will continue to try to do that. As if OPM keeps updating that spreadsheet of who has submitted, then we'll go dig them, we'll go find them, and try to put them on CCAPA.
Yeah. Well, that begs the question. Then I just say that begs the question of how are we going to, set up a system to collect the final documents and updates, because obviously what we're going to do is going to hopefully result in updates. All right, well, we got to think that through, but thank you, Fiona, for and thank Amanda for, and keep going. That sounds like that's going to be our best resource in the short term. So I'm sorry, go ahead, Bruce.
Oh, I was just going to say, and OPM is committed to updating that inventory. We updated it again today because we received the housing plan for the borough of Fenwick, all 2 pages of it down in Old Saybrook. And so that's now on our inventory. So you may want to go hunt that down.
Okay, so OPM at least has a list of the ones that have been received?
That's correct. And
Okay.
eventually, by the time of the deadline, I imagine we will list every plan or every letter explaining why the plan isn't done. They will all be identified there. Maybe we can put the letters up, but again, we worry about posting
Yeah.
municipal documents that way because it's too easy to fall behind.
Right, okay, exactly.
And Tim, I think Melissa suggested you have a couple of folks helping with the administrative capacity. I see at my Alex, who I've been so grateful for in the past. Perhaps I just put some Google Drive links in there in the chat. Perhaps you can circulate those as well. And the Google Drive folder of affordable housing plans is open and editable if anybody has ones that are not in there.
Okay. What occurs to me is that we're going to just want to copy this stuff from the chat and send it out by email to the whole group.
Yep, I've got that covered. So I'll have Ashley send an email with all the links from the chat.
Okay.
Thanks, Alex.
No problem.
Thank you, Alex.
Tim, hi, this is Betsy Gare from the Connecticut Council of Small Towns. I do want to say that I have sent out reminders to all of our municipalities regarding their obligation to prepare the plans, and I am hearing very good things. So a lot of the towns are working with their regional councils of government to prepare a plan, and so we expect that you're going to see batches of them filed. You know, for example, Westcog has been working with 15 municipalities, and those will all probably be filed with OPM en masse. They do have to go through a formal approval process. And in many small towns, over 100 small towns, that means going to the town meeting. And the town meeting is typically going to be held in April. And so, again, there is a process that has to take place. And I know people have been pointing out that there have been, there are delays, but the plans aren't due till June. The guidance wasn't available until the end of December 2020, and the technical assistance grants were not provided until much before that. So I really do think that towns have been very engaged in this process, and I think we're going to see some great results and great participation. And as Bruce pointed out, if they have not submitted their approved plans, then they do need to indicate to OPM why they have not completed the plan. But again, I'm very encouraged by what I'm hearing from our municipalities.
Right. Betsy, why would a town have to go through the town meeting to get a plan approved? I don't understand that.
Because that may be their process, that they, in order to submit a document to OPM, the town meeting, I mean, they have to do a lot of procedural things, as you probably know.
You're not saying every town, you're saying it varied. There may be some towns where that is their process.
Correct. So it may be that the Board of Selectmen does the approval, but it may end up being something that they require the town to do as part of their town meeting.
Okay, but it's town by town. Okay. Okay, last thing, I realize we're a little over our time, and thank you for sticking with us. For the March 31 meeting, Representative Lamar and I and staff will. But one thing we talked about last time is a guest speaker who can talk about municipal process. And we talked about Glenn Chalder, who's probably the leading consultant in Connecticut who helps with plans of conservation and development. I'm in the process of reaching out to him and asking if he can be, and maybe one other speaker that he might recommend, and we'll focus on that. And then I will take it on myself to put together a first outline of what our guidance document might contain, and then that'll give us some particulars that we can start fleshing out. Okay.
I offer a quick thought
Yes, sir.
around speakers. I'm wondering if it would be worth bringing in one or two town officials from towns who have submitted these affordable housing plans, just to hear from them what they thought of the process, what guidance they might have appreciated when they were doing it, so that we can get the perspective of someone who's tried to fulfill their obligation under the law.
That's an excellent suggestion. Thank you, Matt. Okay. Maybe Fino, maybe you and I can look down the list and see which one seems to have been a robust and recent process that we could get an invite to.
Sure.
Very good. Betsy, is your hand still up, or is that your previous hand? Okay. All right. Representative Lamar. Anything you want to chime in on before we close?
Just before we close, again, and very conscious of the fact that for a lot of folks, it's an intimidating process to raise their hand and talk during meetings. If there are issues or concerns or things that we're missing, I want folks to email responses to the group, or when the notices come out, or to Mr. Hauster and myself, just saying, hey, like, I didn't want to bring it up in front of everyone, but I am thinking about this or concerned about this. Can we maybe highlight that? So please do that if you're feeling that, or if you feel like there's just something that we're missing in this process that needs greater attention. And we'll bring it up if you have felt reluctant to do so in this format.
Very good. Well. Okay. I don't see any other hands or waves or anything else. So I will thank you all for your participation. Next meeting is this same time frame, March 31st, and then the full commission meeting is on Monday, the 4th. Erica Byrne, is that correct?
Yes, I believe that's correct.
Yeah. Okay. And then if we decide to meet on the 8th, that would be the Monday, the 4th for the full, and then we would resume our process on the 8th. But so we'll see whether we can get a good quorum for the 8th of April. And I've made all my notes about who's going to send me what and what's going to be sent to whom. And Matt will get you your con plan and other documents. And Matt and Fiona, I'll be in touch with you offline about that invitation. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much.